Hello everyone, my name is Holly and today's video is one of my favorite videos to film of the entire year because I get to talk about all of the amazing books I read in 2023. So my rating system is a bit of a weird one. I'll be talking about both 4 and 5-star reads today. 5-star reads for me are books that I literally save in a fire. They like changed my life in some sort of way, like Half a King by Joe Abercrombie tier, while 4-star reads are also books that I've really loved. There is a decent stack of books here, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Funnily enough, I have no idea how many books that I read this year because I didn't keep track. There's truly a first for everything, I guess. In fact, I feel like I'm going to forget to mention a book or two, and if I do, I'll link them down below in the description box. These are in no particular order, by the way. I'm just starting with the first book here on my list, and the first one is Empire of Exile. This is one of those books I'd recommend for adult fantasy beginners. The concept is that an entire world's worth of cultures were basically forced into one country when they fled as refugees from an unstoppable foe, and this magical wall holds back the enemy. This book takes place when this immigration event happened a generation ago, and we're following a scribe, and we also follow an archive librarian, probably my favorite character, honestly. One of my top favorite things about fantasy is world building, and boy did this have it. It's probably why I always love book one of a series the most, no matter how good the other ones are, no matter how action packed or plot twisty the other ones are. I always love book one the most. I love being introduced into a new world, and boy did this have it. It was fascinating and different. The world was rich and full of history, as history is a big part of what the plot is made of. Oh, and it had a really detailed and neat magic system. So all in all, just like the pinnacle of what I personally think epic fantasy is. I can't wait for the sequel. I believe its planned release is maybe early 2024. I think spring. I don't know. I'm not positive on that, but I'm pumped. It's called Relics in Ruin, and I will absolutely be reading that one the moment that I have it, because this surprised me. It ended up on this list, and I hope if you decide to pick it up that it surprises you. The next book I'm talking about was not a surprise, as I knew I was going to love it, and that was The Hexologist. Not a doubt in my freaking mind that this book was going to knock my socks off, and it truly did. And it's actually not a super common type of book I'd gravitate to, with it being an almost like detective mystery fantasy. I like my medieval dragony type of fantasy that's like brutal and shit. But Josiah Bancroft can do no wrong, and I'm a big fan, and it was so good. We have this supernatural crime fighting duo who are husband and wife, and they have that like funny back and forth banter that like livened up the dark mystery they are trying to solve, which, by the way, it involves the king going mad and seeking help, and everyone is stumped, and medical professionals don't know what to do, and they can't figure out what's wrong with him. So why not ask the two magical mystery solvers to help? It was fun, charming, engaging. There's a dragon, which was an added bonus. There will also be a sequel to this one I can't wait for, as the book does end with a few like dangling threads. I'm absolutely dying to know more about this world and these duo witty detectives. Next book on my list is Will of the Many. I'm pretty positive this book is going to be on everyone's list this year. This is a fantasy where you are just lost and confused the whole time. And normally I don't want to be lost and confused. And sure, this wasn't a 5-star read for me. I believe I gave it like a 4, or was it a 3.5? I don't remember. I know I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to add it to this list, but I was lost and confused in a good way. That probably makes no sense, but it makes sense to me. It's essentially the fantasy version of Red Rising, but make it Roman Empire. It's incredibly ambitious. There is the introduction of an uprising. There's a school, a past life in like parallel universes, not to mention the world itself. It felt like Whiplash for real. I really enjoyed it. I can recognize the effort and love that was put into the story from the author, which is why it deserves to be here on my best books list. Starling House. This is an amazing work of gothic fiction with a touch of added fantasy. I love stories that center on a creepy house, so the possibility of me loving this one was pretty high, and I also love this author, so that helped a lot. We follow Opal and her younger brother who are trying to survive together. I believe they are orphans, if I remember correctly, and they live in a motel in a small town, but she is overwhelmingly curious about the local haunted house, aka Starling House, which is kind of the small town's curse, as it has a really dark mystery surrounding it. She finds herself drawn to the house as if it were like calling her name, and there she meets the young and mysterious owner, and he offers her a job cleaning. And her life has changed forever. Clearly, she is not just cleaning. This is a lovely haunted house novel with much more than you would ever expect. Super atmospheric. Cozy horror is actually a really great descriptor for this, with great characters to root for. It was like reading a dark, enchanting tale about outcast who just wanted to belong somewhere, and I loved how it all came together in the end. I have a really recent release here, and that is The Dragons of Deepwood Fen, which just came out at the beginning of December. This was one of my most highly anticipated fantasies of the year, and I was very lucky. It dropped on my lap unexpectedly. I didn't expect to be sent a copy, but I was, and I started reading it, I think, that day. And yeah, my new favorite dragon fantasy. Man, if you want a book about dragons that have personalities and characters that bond with them, ride them, this is great. And there's even like good dragons and bad dragons, which was really interesting. The world is huge, and I loved getting lost in it. We follow many different characters who are all so different from one another, with different backgrounds and motivations in this high fantasy world. I actually compared this to Mistborn, but if Mistborn took place in the mountains, though it is very slow paced. And sure, it does feel like an introduction to something bigger farther in the series. I just melted right into it, into the mystery of our main thief character who gets into something far more than he bargained for. I loved this, and it actually didn't take me long to read it, though. It's huge. It has like Bible thin pages and very, very small font. My blind ass was squinting. I do have copies of all these books. I'm just too lazy to grab them all. And The Will of the Many is like at the top shelf up here, and I can't reach. Darren's not here, so he can't get it down for me. I'm only 5 foot, people. Anyways, this just worked for me. I can see how maybe it wouldn't work for others. Thankfully, I enjoyed the heck out of it. Gods of Weirdwood. This just had everything I love, but foresty themed. I've always wanted to read a strong, centered forest themed fantasy, and I definitely got that here, though the surprise Lovecraftian theme was just an added bonus because there's a lot of tentacles and everything is very alien. This took nature and just blasted it with weirdness, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. This does have the chosen one trope, like plot, which was a nice familiar thing amongst all the strangeness, but this child chosen one turns out to be false, and ever since that news, he's been running from his past and having a hard time coming to terms with what he is, and maybe entering this absolutely deadly forest where everything wants to kill you will help him somehow. This is much slower paced. It's also very chunky, but man, once you get into those forest scenes, it is fascinating. I've noticed a trend this year that normally, like in past years, I wouldn't like slower paced books, but I enjoyed slower paced books this year. Very weird. I don't know why. Anyways, this is a world that I can't wait to enter again. The Adventures of Amina al-Sarfi, which is definitely not a slow paced book in my opinion. This was my first book by Shannon Chakraborty, and I'm glad to have come out of it very positively because she's a very beloved author. I loved this. I mean, what's not to love? It's about a medieval, Mideastern, middle-aged woman who is a pirate. And sure, on the surface, this is a pirate story with monsters and villains and even some like supernatural events. But the story also has themes and commentary and quality writing that elevate it above the typical adventure story. And while a fantasy, the author did a ton of research, and you can tell, and incorporated real elements of history and culture and mythology. All the sea monsters you get to see are so cool. It was just so fun to read, and the perfect book I was looking for at the time when this released. Nautical, fun, full of heart, a crew of misfits, and one of the most beautiful covers of the year in my opinion. I cannot wait to see what the sequel's cover is going to look like. I hope it's the same like adventure-y scene illustration. The Sword Defiant, the most Lord of the Rings book you will probably find that is actually Lord of the Rings. It's a super classic old school feeling fantasy that always feels like home for me, yet this did come out in 2023. It's one of those stories that takes place after the main villain has been defeated, which we normally don't get to see. That's normally the end of a story, but this is the aftermath of that, and a group of characters who have to go on a quest, and they visit many different locations that were affected by the villain to help clean up, basically. I found this to be such a satisfying read. It was so different yet also familiar at the same time. I think this author created such a unique world and unique characters. Honestly, probably the most satisfying book that I've read this year. The next two books I'm going to group together and mention quickly because they were both sequels, so I can't really talk about them much, but they were The Sapphire Altar, which was book 2 in the Vagrant Gods trilogy, a super well done sophomore book where the magic is tied to these gods and are worshipped by our main characters. It has honestly become one of my favorite worlds, and I can't wait to read the finale in January. I might be currently reading it, but that's a secret between you and me. The Tyranny of Faith, book 2 in the Empire of the Wolf series. This is one hell of a dark and moody fantasy series all about justice. The sequel is even more grittier than the first. I am so relieved that both of these sequels kept up with their wonderful starters, because I also gave both of their book 1s 5 stars, and it's just great to keep the trend going. So hopefully books 3 for both of them are 5-star reads. Come back to my best books of 2024 video and we will find out together. I seriously just can't wait to see how they both end. It's definitely going to be bittersweet. So fantasy isn't the only genre that captured my heart this year. I read some amazing horror as well, and it's actually going to be the last book on this list, and that is The September House. Though personally, I didn't find this book scary at all. It's actually more humor than anything else. So if you're someone who scares easily, I think you might be okay with this one. It's fun and quirky and a really good blend of mystery, ghost horror, and dark comedy. We follow a couple who buys their dream house, this old Victorian style home that's over 150 years old. And it just so happens to have some dark history involving some murders. And every September, shit hits the fan. Funnily enough, I did read this in September, so it was very fitting. Probably amped my love for it, honestly. This isn't your typical slow burn haunted house story. It gets going very quickly. It even begins during the high tide of like blood running down the walls, all Amityville horror-like, and I enjoyed it so much because of that. I don't think I've ever read a book either where the main character is just so accepting of it. And the funny part is she's in her mid-50s, so an older maid character, which was fun to see. She's just having her breakfast while this ghost with like half a face is staring at her like, yeah, this is just my life now. It was like a slice of life horror, and honestly, so fun. And this couple have a daughter, and throughout the years they've kept her from visiting for obvious reasons, but it seems like this year the daughter is taking no for an answer, and they'll have to deal with that. This breathed fresh air into the horror genre for me, and I highly recommend it. Yeah, I had a feeling this was going to happen. I literally ended this video, walked away, and realized I forgot 2 books that definitely need to be on this list. These Burning Stars. Oh my gosh, this is one hell of an original space opera. It is twisty as hell. It is so weird. It almost reminded me of like Avatar, but in space. But then it had like the politics of Dune. So our main character is she's kind of hard to like, but she's cocky. Okay, she's definitely a somewhat off-putting main character, but I loved her so much. She had like that moxie. She knew how to talk to people. I loved it so much. It's honestly one of my favorite sci-fis now, and I can't believe that I forgot to mention it. But I'm so glad that I remembered. Alrighty, and those are some of the most memorable reads of 2023 for me. I really hope you enjoyed. Tell me down below in the comments your best books of 2023, because I would love to know. Anytime you guys mention a book or recommend me a book, I always put it on a list because you guys have amazing reading taste. So you never let me down. Give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me out. Subscribe if you're not. I'd love to have you here. And the next video that I'll be putting up is January book releases, so I hope you look forward to that. Until we meet again, happy reading.